Have you ever heard someone say, your 20s are the best years of your life, and if you waste them, you won't get another chance? People repeat it like an absolute truth, as if time alone can measure a person's worth. And so you rush forward, afraid to rest, afraid to slow down, because if you stop, you might get left behind. You hold on to every timeline society gives you. Graduate before 23, have a stable job by 25, get married before 30, buy a house before 35. And if you're not successful by 40, you're considered a failure. It's an invisible schedule that holds you tight like a pair of iron cuffs. You push yourself every day, smile politely in every meeting, nod when your boss adds more work, and you try to feel grateful even when your heart is full of doubt. You think you're on the right path, but in truth, you're just playing a role in a script written by others people who don't even know who they are. And then one day, after another long, tiring day, you sit down and hear a vague echo from within. Is this really all there is? They tell you your 20s are for passion, for ambition. But that ambition doesn't really come from you. It comes from the pressure to prove yourself, to run faster than everyone else, to succeed so you're not forgotten. So you throw yourself into work like your life depends on it. You believe that if you have a title, a status, the admiration of others, you'll finally feel whole. But the more you run, the further you drift from who you really are. You smile more, but you can't remember the last time it was real. You're busier than ever, yet you feel emptier in every quiet moment. You tell yourself it's just the price of growing up, but deep down, you know something isn't right. Carl Jung called this phase a necessary illusion, an illusion we must all go through. In our early years, we live through the ego, through the need to be seen, to be loved. So we put on a mask called the persona. That mask is made to shield us from judgment, to help us be accepted and liked. But it's not made for us to live truthfully. It's made for survival. Do you remember the times you held back your thoughts just because you were afraid of being judged? The times you worked until you collapsed just to hear someone say, well done? The times you chose a path only because it was considered stable? All of that became part of your mask. You believed it would protect you, that it would keep you safe. But in truth, it's been trading your soul for approval. In your 20s and 30s, you live for applause, for recognition. Every time you achieve something, you feel a little more hollow. But you quickly cover it up with the next goal, a bigger house, a fancier car, a higher position. You never stop to feel, because you're afraid. Afraid that if you do, you'll realize you've only been acting. And after acting for so long, you forget who you really are. The world cheers every time you succeed. But when you come home, turn off the lights, and sit alone, you hear the sigh of your soul. A silence no award can fill, no luxury trip can fix, no crowded party can distract you from. You realize you might be living in a well-furnished house, but inside, you feel colder than any desert. You try to tell yourself, everyone feels this way. This is just normal life. But is normal supposed to mean silencing yourself every day? You remind yourself how lucky you are, that others have it worse. But what does luck mean if you no longer recognize your face in the mirror? If your smile has no light left? If every morning feels like a battle just to get up and move? The mask, the persona, not only hides you from others, it hides you from yourself. You don't dare look into your own eyes. Don't dare touch your unhealed wounds. Don't dare admit that you're burned out from living a life that was never yours to begin with. And day after day, you find yourself becoming just another character in a grand play. A flawless character on the outside, but hollow on the inside. They say this is adulthood. But, growing up doesn't mean hiding who you are. Growing up means having the courage to face the truth. And one day, that truth starts to knock, not with a dramatic breakdown, but gently in a quiet moment when you sit alone. In the blank stare at your reflection, in the racing heart, when you hear the question, am I really alive? Time keeps passing. You keep chasing, keep building the life you think you're supposed to have. But something inside starts to tremble, just a little, like a tiny crack in a wall that once seemed unbreakable. And then you realize, this mask you wear, it can't hold forever. Sooner or later, it will begin to crack. You tell yourself, if I just keep playing my part, everything will be fine. But your soul refuses to sleep. It begins to stir, to ask questions. Not through words, but through feelings, the suffocation in a job you once dreamed of, The distance in relationships that once felt close, the emptiness in things that once brought you joy. And by 40, that tiny crack becomes a break. There's no more hiding. One morning, you wake up and realize nothing seems wrong, yet everything feels off. In that moment, while the world outside remains calm, your inner world falls apart. And that is when the real journey finally begins. One morning, you open your eyes and notice the room is as quiet as always. There are no messages of bad news, no sudden problems. Everything is exactly where it should be. Yet, somewhere deep inside, you feel everything is out of place. The familiar desk, the computer, even the smell of morning coffee no longer brings the warmth it once did. Something breaks quietly but powerfully, as if the shell you have worn for 2 decades no longer fits. The job that once made you proud now feels suffocating. The numbers, the reports, the endless weekly meetings no longer energize you. They drain you. You still do your duty. You still receive praise. But inside you know you are slowly drowning in the very thing that once saved you. Love, if it still exists, has turned into a routine. You and your partner still share dinners, still exchange the same familiar words, but the connection from the early days is gone. You start to wonder, is this still love? Or are we just two people clinging to a shared role? The dreams of your youth that once burned so brightly now feel like they belong to a stranger. When you were younger, you wanted to travel the world, write a book, live a life full of adventure. But now those dreams seem like someone else's story. That person seems to have died somewhere along the way, leaving you here with a life that is adequate, but empty. You begin to ask yourself, am I depressed? Why does everything look fine on the outside but feel broken inside? But this is not an illness. This is an awakening. Like fog slowly lifting, you begin to see what has been hidden behind it. A voice inside you whispers, all these years, you have not been living for yourself. You have only been repeating what others expected of you. Jung once said, the true journey of life begins after 40, not because you didn't try before, but because before then, you weren't yourself. Everything was a patchwork of your family's wishes, society's pressures, and your fear of being left behind. You live like a collage, with pieces of color not chosen by you but painted by others. And as you reach 40, the soul begins to rebel. It refuses to stay silent. You find yourself restless, empty, quick to anger without knowing why. Sometimes you sit among friends and feel like a stranger. You look into the bathroom mirror and no longer recognize your own eyes. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded at a game that was never yours. You climbed the mountain, only to realize it was not the mountain you wanted to conquer. This unease is not gentle. It claws at you. It steals your sleep. It makes you wonder if you're losing your mind. But in truth, it's an invitation from your soul, urging you to lay down the mask you have worn your whole life. What you are facing is not loss, but a beginning. Not a collapse, but a birth. Many call this state a midlife crisis. But if you look closer, it's more like a door. A door into the second half of your life, where you no longer feel the need to become someone for others. There, you begin to ask yourself, if I no longer have to please anyone, no longer have to prove anything, how do I truly want to live? These questions often appear when you sit alone in a dark room, or when you see an old friend living a completely different life, and something stirs inside you. Sometimes they come when you stand in the kitchen, looking at a pile of dishes, realizing you have been repeating the same days for far too long. They don't need a specific reason. They just come, like a crack appearing in the wall, signaling the whole house needs to change. And then you must choose. Keep living in the old house, patching the cracks, repainting the walls, pretending everything is fine, or dare to tear it down, to rebuild, to face the truth that this house was never truly your home. The moment you stand before that choice, fear rises. Fear of losing everything you've built, your job, your reputation, your relationships. Fear that if you change, you'll be seen as a failure. But at the same time, another truth grows clearer. If you don't change, you'll keep dying slowly in silence. This awakening at 40 is not loud, but it shakes everything. You are no longer sure of the path you're on, of the choices you once felt proud of who you really are. You realize life is not just about completing the checklist society gives you. The truth is, you can check every box and still feel empty. And in that emptiness, something begins to stir. A desire, small but real. It doesn't come from anyone's expectations. It comes from deep within you, from the place that still remembers the dreams and desires you once buried. You may not see it clearly at first, but your soul is beginning a silent rebellion. It no longer wants to play a part. It wants the truth. It wants freedom. It wants you to return to yourself. And as that desire grows, you will have to face the hardest questions, the ones that can shake your entire life. The first questions often come as a whisper, then slowly grow louder until they become a knock at the door you can no longer ignore. What if the life I've worked so hard to build isn't the life I truly want? At first, the question seems harmless, but once it appears, it shakes the very foundation you stand on. You sit in the house that was once your symbol of success. Look around at the four walls and quietly ask yourself, is this really my home? Or just a beautifully decorated cage? You begin to trace your memories. How many times in the past did you nod in agreement just to please your parents? How many times did you stay silent in conversations because you didn't want to upset your friends? How many times did you choose a stable job over the thing that made your heart tremble? These moments stack up like bricks, building the wall that now makes it hard for you to breathe. And when you look back, you see that wall was never truly yours. It was built from the expectations, hopes, and advice you absorbed and unconsciously turned into your fate. A heavy sadness rises, not because you failed, not because you made the wrong choices, but because you walked so far down a path, only to realize it leads nowhere you truly want to go. Your greatest achievements may turn out to be distractions, sweet traps that kept you busy enough to forget the essence of being alive. And now, your soul no longer whispers. It screams. It demands that you finally face what you've been avoiding. What if I no longer love this job? What if this relationship has become just a habit? What if everything I've been holding on to is just a mask? These questions aren't betrayal. They are invitations. Invitations to begin a new journey, a journey back to truth. Many people hear this call and immediately panic. They fear they're going through a midlife crisis. They try to cover their ears, drowning it out with more work, short vacations, or spending on new things. But truth is never silent for long. You can delay it, but you can't erase it. Each day, the cracks in your mask grow wider. Each day, the pretending gets heavier. And eventually, you simply can't act anymore. This is not a betrayal of the life you've built. This is a birth, a beginning, a chance for your true self to be born. Jung called this individuation the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not adored by everyone, but whole. Whole with your light and your shadow, your dreams and your regrets, your strength and your wounds. Because only when you can embrace all of it can you truly be yourself. This moment often feels lonely. You may feel like you're betraying your loved ones, betraying the very life you've worked so hard to build. But it's not betrayal, it's truth speaking. And truth always walks with loneliness at first. But if you are brave enough, that loneliness becomes a bridge to another kind of life. Maybe right now, hearing these words, you feel a kind of quiet recognition, like someone has touched a part of you you often keep hidden. If you feel that, let yourself leave a small sign, a message, a silent nod, a simple moment of reflection, because somewhere out there, someone else may be floating in this same emptiness. And your signal might be the thing that helps them feel less alone. Sometimes, all it takes is a quiet gesture, an invisible companion, to help someone take one more step forward. Because you see, no one can walk this journey for you. But that doesn't mean you have to walk it alone. Those who've dared to pause, who've dared to take off the mask, often realize they're not as alone as they once believed. When you speak the truth, you'll see other eyes quietly watching, waiting for someone to say it first so they can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. But whether anyone joins you or not, the call will remain. It will keep echoing until you answer it. And what does answering mean? It doesn't mean throwing everything away overnight. It doesn't mean running away. It means daring to look at the cracks, daring to admit that the paint is peeling, that the house needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. And deep down, you know the time has come. You may not know what lies ahead, but one thing is certain: you can't keep pretending anymore. And when you finally touch that truth, you'll see that the outside world may not welcome it easily. Society has a different name for this awakening, one that sounds frightening, designed to make you doubt yourself. When truth begins to surface, the first thing you encounter isn't support, it's Labels. People will name what you're feeling with something that sounds both strange and frightening: midlife crisis. They smile with gentle concern, telling you not to overthink it, not to let your imagination ruin everything you've worked so hard to build. Society has these labels ready, not to help you, but to make you doubt yourself. Burnout, empty nest, midlife crisis. These words sound like diagnoses. They paint the picture of someone who's broken, someone who needs fixing, who needs pills or a realignment to get back on track. But you know deep down, this isn't a malfunction. This is transformation. An old layer of skin is peeling away, revealing something more real underneath. But because that transformation is so powerful, so uncomfortable, society can't call it a rebirth. So they call it a crisis. Why is that? Because if someone dares to take off the mask, dares to question, dares to live truthfully, they become a threat to the entire system. A system built on obedience: work hard, shop regularly, stick to routines, ask no questions. Think about it. What would happen if millions of 40-year-olds suddenly realized they no longer needed to play the role? The machine built on compliance would start to tremble. So society does everything it can to make you doubt your awakening. They'll say, "You're just tired." They'll say, "Everyone feels this way, it'll pass." They'll warn you, "Don't ruin a stable life over a passing emotion." And to make their point stronger, they dress it in clinical language, as if awakening is a disease that needs treatment. But within you, a deeper truth speaks. This is not illness. This is the soul's rebellion. This is not a breakdown. It's the knock of your true self. What they call crisis is actually a calling to put down the mask and finally look into your real reflection in the mirror. Living in this tug of war is not easy. On one hand, you feel like everything is falling apart. On the other, you sense you are about to touch the most important truth of your life. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. One step back is safe but suffocating. One step forward is uncertain but may set you free. That's why so many choose to turn back. They keep the old armor on, label their awakening as crisis, and learn to ignore the voice within. But you can't. Because once you've tasted truth, you'll never be satisfied with illusion again. You've seen the cracks in the mask. You've heard the silent calling. And once you've heard it, you can't go back to sleep. The hard part is, the world around you won't stay silent as you begin this journey. The eyes of others will start to judge. Friends may whisper, "He's changed. He's not like before." Family may worry, "You're throwing away everything good for something vague." Co-workers may pull away, afraid that your choices will shake the fragile belief they still cling to. And that isolation can make anyone hesitate. You start to realize that living truthfully will cost you not just material things, but outer peace, even relationships that were built on shared illusions. And this is the test. Because awakening isn't just about hearing the call. It's about daring to answer. And that answer is never easy. It feels like a quiet departure, leaving behind old roles to face the emptiness that follows. In those moments, you may feel like a traitor to your job, to your family, to your friends. But a deeper voice will remind you you are not betraying anyone. You are simply choosing to stop betraying yourself. As you begin walking this path, things around you may fall apart. Your work no longer holds you. Relationships start to crack as you stop performing. Financial security grows shaky as you entertain the thought of leaving what no longer fits. But within that chaos, a new seed is planted. That seed is called truth. And once planted, it will grow. So do not be afraid when society calls your awakening a crisis. That is their language, not yours. Try asking your own heart what name it would give this moment. And you might realize that what they call crisis is actually a door. A door opening to the second half of life, where you no longer have to perform, where you finally begin to live as who you really are. But the question remains, do you have the courage to walk through that door? Can you accept that what feels like a collapse is really a rebirth? Can you let the familiar fall away to welcome the part of yourself you've never allowed to exist? And if your answer is not yet, then be careful, because the cost of ignoring the calling isn't just pretense. It's a silent wound that will grow over time, turning into a bitterness you may carry to the end of your days. The cost of turning away from the calling doesn't arrive with thunder or lightning. It's not like a storm that crashes in, destroys everything, and forces you to rebuild. No, it's quieter, more persistent, like a slow, steady rain seeping into the cracks of your soul. You don't notice it at first. You still go to work every day, still smile, still keep your life looking intact. But inside, something begins to erode. At the beginning, it's just a nameless fatigue. You wake up without excitement. Everything feels repetitive, like an old song on loop work, meetings, small talk. You push through it, telling yourself it's just part of being a responsible adult. But slowly, that tiredness becomes a kind of numbness. You stop hoping for something new. You stop daring to dream. They call it living on autopilot. You know today will be like yesterday, and tomorrow will bring nothing different. Time passes, but you're not truly alive in it. It's as if someone pressed pause on your soul, and only your body keeps moving out of habit. At first, this cost seems harmless because technically you're fine. But that very fine is the danger. It doesn't hurt loudly. It just makes you grow dull, bit by bit. It's a silent death, not of the body, but of the life inside. That numbness shows up in many forms. You start to reach for temporary distractions. You curl up on the couch and scroll for hours, losing yourself in other people's lives to avoid the emptiness in your own. You drink more not to enjoy, but to quiet a nameless unease. You work harder, not out of passion, but to avoid facing yourself. You say, "I'm okay, thanks," to everyone. But you know you haven't truly felt okay in a long time. And from that numbness, something else begins to grow. Bitterness. Bitterness doesn't explode like anger. It drips slowly, quietly, but it haunts you. You start resenting the joy of others. When someone dares to break free, to live honestly, you scoff, roll your eyes, maybe even mock them. But deep down, it's not disdain. It's envy. It's regret. It's the anger you carry toward yourself for not being brave enough. Bitterness is the natural consequence of ignoring your soul's call. It's the voice that was never heard, now festering into a wound. It makes you harsh, quick to snap, eager to judge. You mock those who dare to dream because you once dreamed too, but buried it with your own hands. You ridicule those who dare to change because you had a chance too, and you looked away. And then, that bitterness becomes a wall. You can no longer feel joy fully. A beautiful song doesn't move you like it used to. Reuniting with an old friend feels strangely distant. You look into the face of someone you love, but all you see is an invisible gap. Not because they changed, but because you closed yourself off. You chose safety so completely that you severed your own ability to feel. Worse still, you become a stranger to yourself. Some nights, you flip through old photos, look into the eyes that once sparkled there, and realize you no longer resemble that person. You hear yourself laugh in an old video and flinch. When did my laughter start sounding so forced? You look in the mirror and see someone who still functions, still performs, but who no longer feels alive. That is what it means to abandon yourself. Not because someone else did it to you. You did it to yourself. You chose safety over truth. You chose pretending over being real. And the cost is a half-lived life present, but not truly alive. The frightening part is, once you're in this state, you find countless ways to justify it. You say, "I have responsibilities. I can't change now." You say, "I'm too old to start over." You say, "This is just normal." Everyone feels this way. But those reasons are only a thin blanket covering a colder truth. You gave up before life had a chance to give you its best. And so, as the years go by, that self-abandonment hardens into quiet bitterness. It doesn't destroy you all at once. It just makes you slowly wither, like a flame starved of air still burning, but no longer bright, no longer warm. That flame doesn't go out, but it turns to embers, flickering quietly, a faint reminder of what could have been. The truth is, your soul is still there. It doesn't disappear just because you stopped listening. It still whispers, still knocks, but with each refusal, its voice changes. From a gentle invitation, it becomes a push. From a push, it becomes pain. And finally, it becomes bitterness. Bitterness that clings to you because it's made of all the life you were too afraid to live. And when that bitterness seeps into every breath, every thought, it doesn't just leave you wilted. It begins to rob you of your belief that change is even possible. But even when you think you've lost everything, another door is still waiting to open the door of rebirth. Bitterness can last for years, even decades, if you keep turning away from the calling. But strangely enough, the human soul never loses its patience. It never gives up on you, even when you've given up on yourself. It waits. It knocks quietly, again and again. And then one day, when pretending becomes unbearable, when the cost of silence is too heavy to carry, you realize you have no choice left but to change. Change at 40 is not a reckless rebellion. It's not like the bold experiments of your 20s. Change at this stage is an act of survival. It's no longer a question of, should I? It becomes, if I don't, I will wither away. And that's the first step into the second half of life rebirth. Many people think that rebirth requires something grand: quitting their job, leaving a relationship, buying a one-way ticket to somewhere far away. But in truth, rebirth begins with something much smaller. It begins with a pause, a moment where you sit in silence. No music, no phone, no attempt to fill the void. You simply sit there, breathe, and listen to the sound of your own heart. In that quiet, you may hear a voice long buried, whispering, "This is not all there is. There is still more. There is still life." Rebirth also begins when you dare to say no. No to the work that drains you. No to the gatherings that only serve appearances. No to pretending you're okay when you clearly are not. That no is not an act of rebellion against the world. It is a gentle act of love toward yourself. It is your way of saying, "I too deserve to live truthfully." Slowly, you also learn how to say yes. Yes to things that once made your heart tremble, but you pushed aside. Yes to small joys, like reading a book just because you want to, not to prove anything. Yes to walking in the park, listening to the sound of leaves instead of your phone. Yes to drawing again, writing again, singing again, even if no one notices. Not to impress, but to reconnect with the aliveness that had been forgotten. This process isn't always beautiful. You will lose things. You might lose a job you've had for 15 years. A relationship may fade when you stop playing the old role. People who once praised you may turn away because they no longer understand you. But with every loss, a strange sense of relief seeps in. It's like cleaning out an old house. Letting go of dusty things so light can finally enter. And then you begin to realize your life before 40 wasn't wrong. It was simply incomplete. It was a preparation, a kind of lab where you tested out roles until you finally had the courage to ask, "Who am I really?" In that moment, a new kind of peace begins to appear. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer pretending. When you say no to what isn't true, and yes to what makes your heart stir, you begin to feel a kind of power. No one can take from you the power of truth. You realize rebirth doesn't mean becoming someone completely new. It's not about changing your skin or becoming a different version of yourself. Rebirth is a return to the child who once dreamed, who once dared, who wasn't afraid to be seen. A return to the innocence you lost when you put on the mask of adulthood. A return to who you were before the world told you who to be. Jung called this process individuation, becoming whole. It doesn't ask you to discard your darkness and only keep the light. It invites you to hold both. You learn to look at your regrets and forgive them. You learn to touch your childhood wounds and allow them to heal. You learn to accept your anger, your weakness, your fear, not as enemies, but as parts of you. Because only when you welcome all of it can you become whole. This rebirth may surprise you. Because once you stop running from the dark, you begin to see that darkness holds its own kind of light. Once you stop avoiding sadness, you find it opens a depth that shallow joy never could. Once you stop trying to be strong all the time, you discover that vulnerability is what creates true connection. The parts you once tried to hide become the very keys that unlock your new life. And then, day by day, you begin to see yourself differently. Not in the eyes of others, but in your own. You look in the mirror and see a face still marked by time, but eyes that are brighter, deeper, more honest. You smile, and this time, the smile isn't for anyone else. It doesn't need applause. It only needs you. Rebirth is not the destination. It is the beginning. Not the impulsive start of your 20s, but the steady, clear, powerful beginning of your 40s. You no longer crave approval. You begin to desire a deeper life, a more truthful one, even if few understand it. And in that new stillness, a great gift begins to reveal itself. A gift many people spend their whole lives searching for, but few truly find the gift of becoming fully yourself. There is a very special moment in this journey when you realize That all the pain, the struggle, the loss you've endured, all of it has led you here, to this place, the place where you are finally allowed to be yourself. Not the version your parents wanted, not the image society celebrates, not the mask you once wore to be loved, but you raw, scarred, tender, and fierce, filled with light and shadow, but fully alive and real. The greatest privilege of a lifetime is not fame. It's not wealth. It's not praise from others. The privilege is becoming who you were always meant to be. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now, those words begin to settle deep into your bones. You see that you were never late. Every detour, every wound, every fall was not in vain. They were scattered pieces that have finally come together into a picture you'd never seen before. It was all preparation for this moment of rebirth. In your 20s, you believed your worth came from recognition. You chased approval. You ran after standards set by the world. But in your 40s, when the mask finally falls, you realize the only validation that matters is your own. When you can look in the mirror and say, "I know who I am and I am enough." Entering the second half of life, you begin to see you no longer need to chase shallow things. You begin to choose depth over noise. You choose a quiet afternoon alone over a crowded party. You choose one honest conversation over 100 polite greetings. You choose to write a few words for yourself, rather than post a story just to collect likes. This shift doesn't happen because you've grown weaker, but because you've grown stronger. Strong enough to no longer need applause. Strong enough to choose temporary solitude over false belonging. Strong enough to stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that never felt right. And the beautiful thing is, when you dare to live truthfully, real connections begin to find you. Not everyone will hear this new frequency, but those who do, they will appear. These are relationships that need no performance, no pretense. Just one look is enough. These are people who don't care about your status, but care about your essence. They become your new family, your companions, for the road ahead. You may lose much, but you will find something few ever do: freedom. Not the kind of freedom where you do whatever you want, but the kind where you are no longer forced to do what goes against your soul. Freedom is when you stop asking for permission to exist. Freedom is when you no longer ask, "Do they understand me?" and begin to say, "I understand myself," and that is enough. When you touch that freedom, a deep peace begins to settle in. The noise of comparison fades. The pressure to prove disappears. You live, and you know that you are alive. Each breath becomes more vivid. Each morning, you wake not with a burden, but with opportunity. The opportunity to live fully, to experience deeply, to become. The interesting thing is, when you stop trying to be someone else, you become more magnetic than ever. Not because you're richer or more successful, but because your presence carries a different energy. People feel calm around you because you're no longer pretending. You don't need to impress anyone. And that very lack of need becomes a quiet, powerful draw. You realize that happiness isn't some distant peak. It's the ability to sit in stillness and feel complete. Happiness is no longer waiting for something outside you to make you whole, because you are already whole in this very moment. And when you look back, you see that everything that once terrified you, the collapse, the loneliness, the loss, was never the end. It was a doorway into truth. Your life before wasn't a mistake. It was the introduction. And now, the second half truly begins. You no longer race against time. You understand now you were never late. Every detour was part of the journey. Every wound was a reminder. Every tear was a cleansing. All of it prepared you for this moment where you stand now, grounded, honest, alive. Jung once warned, "It is a terrible mistake to enter the afternoon of life with the same assumptions that guided us in the morning. The morning belongs to the ego, ambition, image, approval. But the afternoon belongs to the soul. And the soul doesn't need to be impressive. It needs to be real, free, whole." This is the true privilege of a lifetime: to live without pretending, to exist without apology. And once you've tasted that, you know there is nothing more precious. You look ahead. The road is still long. There will still be challenges. But this time, you no longer walk with the fear of being left behind. You walk with the quiet, knowing that you're exactly where you need to be. Because at last, You have come home. And now, the only question left, the question no one else can answer for you is this. If your life truly begins at this moment, who are you ready to become? Because you were never late. You were only evolving. And right now, in this very breath, the door is open. The only question is, will you walk through it? Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.